Welcome back, everyone. We are back into the book of Genesis today, plodding along. How are you doing this morning?
Hanging in there?
Yeah? Jack?
I'm in a good mood.
Yeah, in a good mood? What do we have planned for the day? Working in the orchard?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's cold, 46 degrees this morning.
Better than yesterday, 26.
Was it 26? Still frosting. All right, so we'll pick up where we left off last time. We're in Genesis chapter 21. Actually, let's just jump into it. We have a lot to get into today. And the Lord visited Sarah as he had, and said the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken to him. How old was Abraham when he had his firstborn son, Jack?
He was like in his 90s or his hundreds, right?
100 or so, right? 100 or so. And Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac. Then Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, and as God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him, and Sarah said, God has made me laugh, and all who hear will laugh with me. She also said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? For I have borne him a son in his old age. So this was something that was very unusual in the day.
It'd be unusual, too, for a woman of 90 to have a child.
It's interesting when we see the early patriarchs and the matriarchs, long lifespans, close to 1,000 years. Who was the oldest recorded man in the Bible, Jack?
I can't remember his name.
Methuselah.
Methuselah was nearly 1,000 years old. And we seem to be winding down, lifespans getting shorter and shorter, deteriorating. It's kind of interesting. I've always thought that the farther we have gotten away from the original, that life-giving essence from God, we are running down. When we're separated from, what are we made to run on? What did God make us to run on? Food, yeah. What else? Oxygen. But what's the number one thing? What was the life-giving thing?
What, his breath?
The breath of life. God breathed his breath of life, and man became sentient. And we see, if we go to the last book of Revelation, we see that there's a tree. And in that tree is the tree of life. And the leaves is for the healing of the nation. It's almost as if there was something in that garden that rejuvenated man and women and kept them immortal. And when we were expelled from the garden, separated from that life-giving force, we seem to be on this downward decline, getting worse and worse, or lifespan getting shorter and shorter and shorter. But even in Abraham's time, we see that 100 years old to have children was an odd thing, something that probably no one had ever seen before. So the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the same day, and Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, scoffing. Therefore she said to Abraham, cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondage shall not be heir with my son, namely with Isaac. So things are not going well in Abraham's house. So we know that Abraham was promised that he would have a son, but it was taking too long. So him and Sarah decided to take matters into their own hands. Sarah came up with the idea, I'll tell you what, I'll give you my woman servant, my maid servant, and you have a child with her, and we'll raise him since I'm not able to, and we'll make a great nation out of him, right? Was this God's plan?
No.
So the son was born, and do you think Abraham loved his son?
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe more so than Sarah?
Yes.
Yeah, this was, I would imagine that Sarah realized that she had made a great mistake when this boy was born. We also have, as we read earlier, that Hagar, she didn't behave very well. She got a little uppity. What are some examples that we saw of that?
Well, she was mocking and teasing and...
So we have this family. We have 2 women, 1 man, and we have a rivalry. So the firstborn son, that was really important in those days. That was the firstborn was heir to the promises, heir to the blessings, heir to even all of the properties. It's very significant in the real world and in the spiritual world as well. And so we have this woman that has been elevated from most likely a servant or a slave to being is she now the number one wife because she was able to give Abraham a son?
Well, she wasn't a wife, and the other thing is that oftentimes the firstborn wouldn't get things if they were considered illegitimate. So is this now legitimate child or an illegitimate?
It's kind of a gray area.
It's very gray.
Isn't it?
So is he firstborn or not?
So if that wasn't bad enough, Hagar, the mother of this child, was rubbing it in a little bit. Maybe dropping comments, maybe little sideways glances, but this started to really grate on Sarah, galled her even to the point where as the moment she was willing to keep her mouth shut, but the moment that she had her own son, the first thing she goes is to Abraham and says, get rid of this woman and this boy. He's not going to be the heir.
Well, actually, this is when when Isaac was weaned, right? So he was 3, maybe 4 back in the day.
Yeah, I think that the weaning would be later than it is now.
Yeah, right. And then it's Sarah, and then Hagar is mocking then. So she's put up with this duality of some sort for 3 to 4 years.
So who's to blame here? Do we know? Do
all
we have enough information?
All 3 of them.
Can you imagine what it was like in Abraham's tent with these dueling women and this argument over the birthright and the firstborn? This is a bad situation.
Yeah, it's bad for everybody. I mean, poor Ishmael and poor Isaac.
Abraham's faced with a difficult problem. His wife, wants him to get rid of this woman. There's not going to be any peace in the tent until something happens. He probably is waffling. He doesn't know what to do. God steps in. What does God say here? But God said to Abraham, do not let it be displeasing in your sight because of the lad or because of your bondwoman. Whatever Sarah has said to you, listen to her voice, for in Isaac your seed shall be called. Yet I will make a nation of the son of the bondwoman because he is your seed. What does this paragraph tell us about the character of God, Jack?
That he's not going to choose between either. He's going to make both into a nation.
What was the promise he made to Abraham?
That Sarah would give him a child that would become a great nation.
And the bigger promise was that your seed I will make a great nation out of it. Mm-hmm. So was it God's plan for him to have 2 sons?
No.
So because they didn't listen to God and they became impatient and they decided to do their own thing, did God just wash his hands of the whole thing and said, well, I tried, but you didn't do what I told you, so it's not going to happen now. You what's it called when you have a contract between 2 people or a covenant and one person breaks this contract or breaks this covenant?
Breach of contract.
Breach of contract. Is the contract binding after this?
It depends, right? It depends on what's happened in the past and how they want to move forward and if there's an oral agreement. And
this is interesting. This really plays to the point of God meets us where we're at. And God is willing, rather than just having an ironclad plan that's written in stone, he's willing to change things because of us. It's pretty astonishing when you think about that, right? It also shines a light on the importance that God puts on covenants, agreements, and promises. He made this promise to Abraham. It was pretty broad. Your seed will be blessed. Your seed will do this. Well, this extends to Ishmael as well. So God gives Abraham an out, but this is kind of heartless, isn't it? I mean, this is hard on the woman. So he's going to send this woman out of the camp. Now, this is not like, well, you can't be in my house or my tent anymore, so you'll have to go somewhere else. Maybe the government will have some subsidies or some discount housing, or is there anything like that for this poor couple? Mm-mm. So what is their fate, most likely?
Death or slavery.
Certain death. Either they go out into the wilderness and they run out of food and water and they perish, or they're destroyed or torn by a wild animal, or someone takes them as a slave or worse. It's rough, but God tells him, go ahead and do it. Do you think this was an easy decision for Abraham? Was he glad to get these quarreling women apart?
No.
Maybe he was glad to get the quarreling women apart, but not his son, probably.
I think Jack's right. So Abraham rose early in the morning, and he took bread and a skin of water, and putting it on her shoulder, he gave it and the boy to Hagar and sent her away. Then she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. Do you think Abraham could have spared a donkey or two?
Mm-hmm.
He put it on her shoulder. Said, whatever you can carry, you can have. I personally, if I had found myself in that situation, I would like to think that I would have made every provision for my illegitimately born, well, not illegitimately, that's hard to say, my son and my, what do you call her, concubine? Nonetheless, she's still family, right?
No.
Well, the son is family.
The son is
If
family.
nothing else, maybe sent some armed men with him. I don't know. Maybe God gave him specific instructions. We don't know. All we know is he gave her a jug of wine and a sack lunch and wished them well and said, off you go.
That's the sort of thing where you'd think that the woman would come back to haunt them. Like you have a 13-year-old son and a, well, how old was the son?
About 13.
Probably about that.
Yeah, like a 13-year-old son and then his mother, and you send them off with very little provisions and tell them, well, go off then. I think that if I were those two, I would want to come back and like tear down their tent or graffiti some part of their thing to try to like leave an impression upon them.
To shame them into doing the right thing?
Yeah. Or just like, you send them out with like a little bit of food and then a little bit of drink. It's not very kind of them, is it? Like she's been raising his son for 13 years, and then he just says, all right, you're out. It seems like you'd want to come back and do something to him.
Get revenge, maybe. Feel like you've been, we have many stories in history of young men that their families were mistreated or wronged in some way that grow up
And then go back
and
for
to go back to revenge their family in their
A
honor.
blood feud.
A blood feud. Let's back up a little bit.
You kind of wonder if maybe Ishmael was not very nice. I mean, had Ishmael been sweet and kind, maybe Abraham would have fought for him, or maybe Sarah would have said, "Send Hagar, but leave Ishmael here."
Well, it always did say that the hand of others would be turned against him. So maybe it wasn't just referring to his descendants. Maybe it was referring to him also. So maybe he was just unlikable.
Well, we have a text. We have at the party, so Abraham is getting ready. The child is about to be weaned. He's having a great feast, inviting all of his friends over. We have a little text in here that says Ishmael was mocking.
It does. I thought it just said Hagar was mocking.
He was talking trash.
Oh, I didn't. Mine doesn't say that. In 21:9, Sarah saw in the son whom Hagar. Sarah saw that the son was mocking. You're right.
But you gotta wonder, did Abraham might have kind of like thrown Ishmael away to the side a bit, like Ishmael probably was not like. I bet that as soon as Isaac was born, Abraham devoted more time to Isaac. Because Isaac is his legitimate son.
It's quite possible.
Isaac is his like promised son, and Ishmael probably. He's at an age that he knows he's probably going to be like something's happening, that he's not going. He's probably not going to get the inheritance, or he's going to be cast away because he's illegitimate or something like that. And so you can't really blame him for being bitter about another child that comes in and like is going to take everything from you.
It kind of reminds me a little bit of the prodigal son, where the son who was at home, was complaining that his brother got things, and his father said, everything I have is yours as well. And you kind of wonder if Abraham felt that way about Ishmael, that everything I have is yours. You're both promises, you both are heirs to the promise. You're both, if they both had this, and yet Ishmael isn't seeing that picture. He is only seeing, I have a rival.
Abraham is probably thinking, can't we all just get along?
Yeah, but I mean, like at this point, the prodigal son story hadn't been told or anything, and Ishmael. I mean, Ishmael was an illegitimate son, which means that he probably would have been cut out of the inheritance if Abraham could do it. Maybe Abraham probably didn't treat him as kindly.
Do you think Abraham would have had a choice to cut him out? Because God had made the promise, and if Abraham had tried to cut him out of the inheritance, then that would have made God's words untrue. So have you heard the saying, the nut doesn't fall, or the apple doesn't fall far from the tree?
Yeah.
Hagar, when she started getting a little uppity, when she had the son, the firstborn, and this really chafed Sarah. Well, Ishmael grew up in that tent with that woman, hearing her grumbling, hearing her complaining, hearing about her rivalries with Sarah. So he probably kind of took on that as well. And at this point where the spotlight is finally off of him and onto Isaac for this great feast and the weaning, he's feeling a little left out. And he's grumbling to people, and Sarah catches wind of this and she's not having it. So that kind of sets the stage, So where do we go from here? So he sends them out, and they're out into the wilderness, and the water in the skin was used up, and she placed the boy under one of the shrubs. Then she went and sat down across from him at a distance of about a bow shot, for she said to herself, let me not see the death of the boy. So she sat opposite him and lifted her voice and wept. Do you think Abraham, it was easier for him to send her out because he had just had a conversation with God, and what did God tell him he was going to do with these two?
He was going to make him a nation.
Yeah. So Abraham knowing, well, I don't really know all the details, I don't know what's going on, but God just told me that he's going to make a great nation of Ishmael, so there's nothing that can happen to him. It's not really my responsibility anymore. God will have to provide in the wilderness. Is that what he was thinking, and is that how he slept at night?
Abraham sure does, like, kind of go way too far and then go way too little in different circumstances, doesn't he?
He totally does.
He's like, well, it's been 2 years. I'll just have a child with my wife's woman servant, and then later on he sends them off with one water skin
On foot.
Yeah.
It's hard to like him.
Abraham?
Yeah. The more you read about him, the less likable he is. He's so wimpy in so many circumstances.
He did field an army and rescue his son-in-law.
He didn't rescue him. His men did.
Well, I don't know. Did he lead from the front or was he in the back? It's like, you go ahead and go on up there.
And I guess usually part of the reason we like certain characters in the book are because they're so relatable and because they're not perfect. And yet somehow you want Abraham to be stronger than he is.
Abraham's just kind of, he's not very likable. He's not a very good role model.
Yeah. He's milquetoast in all the wrong times.
I want to be like Abraham when I grow up.
So they run out of food. They run out of water. Can you imagine, as a mother, we all know one of the worst ways to die is to die from thirst in the wilderness and hunger. It's grim. It's one thing for that to happen to you, but to watch your young son doing it, it was so hard for her that she put him out of sight, so she couldn't hear him if he was crying or what it was. It was just too heartbreaking for her. A bow shot, probably about 100 yards or so. Huh? God heard the voice of the lad. Then the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven and said to her, "What ails you, Hagar?" We have several examples of this. Remember in the Eden, after Adam and Eve partook of the fruit from the knowledge of the tree of good and evil, they hid themselves. And God came down and he didn't know where they were at. "Where are you?" he says. Does he really not know? Did he really not know where they were at?
No, he knows.
He knows.
It does seem a bit insensitive, though.
How about
She-
Sodom? Did the destroying angels came down and said, "We've heard these reports that there's wickedness in Sodom. I'm not really sure what's going on, but we're going to go in there and find out for ourselves." Did God not know what was taking place in Sodom?
Yeah, he did.
Then why the subterfuge? Why the, dare say, deceit?
Ooh.
Maybe not deceit, but it is, if you know something and you pretend that you don't know it, what else can you call it?
Maybe allowing people to explain things of their own. I feel like God in this scenario coming down and asking her what ails you. I feel like that's a bit cruel. Like she's out in the wilderness. She's just been exiled from her home after raising the son of a wealthy farmer and a prophet from God, and then God sends down an angel while she's like dying of dehydration, because at this point they're probably going to be dying of dehydration. And he says, "What ails you?" And she has to reply back with her cracked throat and like tear-stained face that, well, you kind of got kicked out of your prophet's house.
It does kind of feel like the cat toying with the mouse, doesn't it? I mean, yeah, I mean, that would be aggravating. Your lips are cracking. I mean, you can imagine the misery. And an angel says, "So, what's going on? Why are you so sad?" That would be aggravating.
That would be infuriating.
Infuriating. It would.
Well, and it kind of speaks to whether Hagar is a believer or not. Because these things have happened, and Abraham's like, "Well, God said you're going to be fine, so I'm sending you out." And so she's getting sent out, but that doesn't mean that she believes that God actually thinks they're going to be fine.
She may be holding to her pagan faith or whatever. Who knows where she came from? I think it says, I don't remember. "What ails you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is." He hasn't heard your voice, but he heard your son's voice. "Arise, lift up the lad and hold him with your hand, for I will make him a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the skin with water and gave the lad a drink. So God was with the lad, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness and became an archer. He dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. And it came to pass at that time that Abimelech, the commander of his army, spoke to Abraham, saying, "God is with you in all that you do. Now therefore swear to me by God that you will not deal falsely with me, with my offspring or with my posterity, but that according to the kindness that I have done to you, you will do to me and to the land of which you have dwelt." And Abraham said, "I will swear."
Wait, what?
Neighboring king comes up and he's looking at Abraham, and he's looking about how God is prospering him, and Abraham's becoming powerful. He's looking about the future. He's like, I'm afraid it's going to come to pass that Abraham is going to become so powerful that he's going to take us over. He's just going to move us out, and we're not even going to exist anymore. So I'm going to try to preempt this. Let me go make friends with Abraham. Therefore, when he does get there, they're not going to throw us out of our land and overtake us.
Yeah.
Right. So he's being very, very frugal.
It's like pre-Roman situations. Like, hey, you be friends. Maybe we'll send you some taxes, things like that.
And Abraham said, "I will swear." Now, what are the consequences of this? 100, 200,000 years down the way.
Well, it all depends on how long that promise continues.
Exactly.
Is it just Abraham's promise, or is it everybody's promise?
By Abraham promising this, what if it was God's design that these particular people, after a certain amount of time, would be given an opportunity to know God and to know the right way? Watching Abraham, watching him prosper, you would look at that. Sometimes when you go fishing, always when you go fishing, you can have a giant lake. And as soon as one boat starts catching fish, it won't be long before there's about 12 boats very close to you. It's just the way it works. And I think that was part of God's plan, raising up this people in this this wicked world, as a light on a hill, as an example. And when you see that your life is falling apart, when you see that everything is bad, and then you see this family that's prospering and doing very well, you might get to the point where you want to inquire. What is it about this man and about their lifestyle that is making them do so well, and maybe even adopting that to yourself, right? If a guy's catching a bunch of fish and you're not, you want to know why he's catching fish.
Right.
So
Maybe he has Cheetos on the end of his.
maybe he does.
Everybody likes Cheetos.
So Abraham swears, and we have another covenant here. Then Abraham rebuked Abimelech because of a well of water which Abimelech's servants had seized. And Abimelech said, I do not know who has done this thing. You did not tell me, nor had I heard of it until today. So Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two of them made a covenant. And Abraham sat 7 ewe lambs of the flock by themselves. And Abimelech asked Abraham, what is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs, which you have set by themselves? And he said, you will take these 7 ewe lambs from my hand, and they may be a witness that I have dug this well. Therefore he called that place Beersheba, because of the two of them swore an oath there. Thus they made a covenant at Beersheba. So Abimelech rose with Phicol, the commander of his army, and they returned to the land of the Philistines. Then Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and there called on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God, and Abraham stayed in the land of the Philistines for many days.
Oh, so those are the Philistines. I missed that part. He said he stayed in the land of the Philistines for several days.
So one thing, and I'll have to read into this, but it seems 1 minute left. Well, you could go down a lot of rabbit holes with all this stuff. I just have to keep it at our time limit. Any questions?
So we'll talk about this tomorrow or the day after?
We have all year to talk about it. We'll get through what we get through.
Okay.
Any questions?
No.
Any thoughts? Let's finish up with this at the end of our studies. What does this story, how does these interactions between all of these characters, what does this tell us about the character of God? What did we learn about God from these?
He's willing to deal with our mistakes and continue to be gracious.
I feel like these lines don't shed that great of a light on God. I feel like they're a bit, like, he seems a bit mocking with the woman servant and Hagar. I feel like that's...
He did honor his promise, though. Right?
Yeah, but still, he didn't need to be so condescending, it seems like.
Yeah. Sometimes when you get into wordage like this, that it sounds this way or harsh, one of the best things a guy can do is to go check multiple translations to see if you can get a bigger picture, really fill in some of the cracks. What does your version say?
What is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation.
Probably just meant something different in Hebrew. It's not what is the matter, Hagar. It is like
I have heard your cry.
Yeah, something like that.
Well, we don't know, but what we do know is that he honored his promise, and he will make a nation out of this young man, and he did look after him and his mother. Tough situation. It just goes, God has a plan. It's to go from straight point A to point B in a straight line, and we refuse most of the time. I think most of us refuse, and we will eventually get to B if we keep at it, but it will start to look like this. All right, well, keep us in your prayers. May God bless you and your families, and we'll see you guys on the next video.